The morning sun cast long shadows across the rocky terrain as Dr. Sarah Chun adjusted her backpack straps one final time. The mountain rescue team had been called out before dawn to search for a missing family of 4 who had failed to return from their weekend camping trip in the remote wilderness of the Cascade Mountains. What should have been a routine 2-day hike had turned into something far more concerning when the family's emergency contact received no word from them past their scheduled return time. Sarah glanced at her teammates as they gathered around the trailhead. Marcus Rodriguez, their team leader with 15 years of search and rescue experience, spread the topographical map across the hood of their rescue vehicle. His weathered hands traced the planned route the missing family had filed with the Park Service 3 days earlier. Beside him stood Jake Thompson, a former Marine whose keen tracking skills had saved countless lives in these mountains, and Emma Walsh, a paramedic whose medical expertise had proven invaluable on previous missions. The missing family consisted of David and Lisa Patterson, both in their early 40s, along with their 2 children, 12-year-old Tommy and 8-year-old Mia. According to the park rangers, the Pattersons were experienced hikers who had visited this area several times before. They had packed sufficient supplies for their planned route and carried proper emergency equipment, including a satellite communicator that should have allowed them to call for help if needed. Marcus pointed to a series of interconnected trails that wound through dense forest before opening into alpine meadows. The family's planned route would take them through some of the most beautiful but challenging terrain in the region. Several creek crossings, steep elevation gains, and areas prone to sudden weather changes made this particular trail system both rewarding and potentially dangerous for unprepared hikers. As the team began their ascent, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. In her 7 years with the mountain rescue team, she had learned to trust her instincts. Missing hikers usually fell into predictable categories: those who had simply taken longer than expected, those who had become lost but were actively trying to find their way back, and those who had encountered some form of emergency that prevented them from continuing or calling for help. The trail began gently enough, winding through old-growth forest where massive Douglas fir and western hemlock trees created a cathedral-like canopy overhead. The team maintained a steady pace while keeping their eyes trained on the ground for any signs of the missing family's passage. Jake periodically stopped to examine disturbed earth, broken vegetation, or other indicators that people had recently traveled this way. After 2 hours of hiking, they reached the first major landmark on the Patterson family's planned route: a wooden bridge spanning a rushing creek swollen with recent snowmelt from the peaks above. Marcus called for a brief halt while Jake examined the area for clues. The bridge showed signs of recent use, with fresh scuff marks on the wooden planks and a small piece of blue fabric caught on one of the support posts. Emma carefully extracted the fabric and held it up to the light. The material appeared to be from outdoor hiking gear, possibly a jacket or backpack. While they couldn't be certain it belonged to the missing family, it provided their first potential indication that the Pattersons had successfully reached this point on their journey. The team pressed on, following the trail as it began to climb more steeply through a series of switchbacks carved into the mountainside. The forest gradually thinned as they gained elevation, giving way to scattered stands of alpine fir and exposed granite slopes dotted with hardy mountain plants. The views grew increasingly spectacular, but Sarah found herself unable to appreciate the beauty while worry gnawed at her thoughts. Marcus attempted to raise the Patterson family on their emergency radio frequency, broadcasting their call sign and requesting any response. The radio crackled with static, but no human voice emerged from the white noise. He repeated the call several times before switching to the satellite communicator frequency, hoping to reach the family's emergency device directly. Again, only silence greeted their attempts. As they continued climbing, Jake discovered more encouraging signs. Fresh boot prints in a muddy section of trail matched the shoe sizes listed in the missing persons report. A granola bar wrapper caught under a bush bore the same brand mentioned in the family supply list. These small discoveries confirmed they were following the correct route and that the Pattersons had indeed traveled this way. The trail eventually emerged from the forest into a vast alpine meadow carpeted with wildflowers. Under normal circumstances, this would be a place of breathtaking beauty where hikers would stop to rest and take photographs. However, dark clouds had begun gathering on the horizon, and a cold wind carried the scent of approaching rain. Sarah consulted her altimeter and GPS unit, confirming they had reached approximately the same elevation where the Patterson family should have camped on their first night. According to their filed itinerary, they had planned to establish camp near a small alpine lake visible in the distance across the meadow. The team quickened their pace, hoping to find some trace of the family's campsite. The lake sat nestled in a natural amphitheater of granite cliffs and talus slopes. Its crystal-clear water reflected the surrounding peaks like a perfect mirror, disturbed only by the occasional trout rising to snatch insects from the surface. This was exactly the kind of pristine wilderness location that drew families like the Pattersons to these mountains. Jake's trained eye immediately spotted signs of recent camping activity near the lake's eastern shore. Flattened grass marked where a tent had been erected, and a circle of stones showed where a campfire had burned. Small pieces of charcoal and ash confirmed the fire was recent, probably within the last 2 or 3 days. Marcus knelt beside the fire ring and carefully sifted through the cold ashes with a stick. The remnants told a story of a normal camping experience: partially burned pieces of firewood, bits of food packaging, and the twisted remains of marshmallow roasting sticks. Nothing suggested panic or emergency. Emma discovered more personal items scattered around the former campsite. A child's sock lay forgotten under a nearby bush, and a small plastic water bottle bore teeth marks consistent with nervous chewing by a young person. These intimate details painted a picture of a family enjoying their wilderness adventure, making their subsequent disappearance even more puzzling. The team expanded their search pattern around the lake, looking for any indication of which direction the Patterson family had traveled when they broke camp. The official trail continued around the lake's northern shore before climbing toward High Mountain Pass, but numerous unofficial paths branched off in various directions, leading to fishing spots, scenic overlooks, and alternative routes back to the trailhead. As the afternoon wore on and storm clouds continued building overhead, Sarah felt their window of good weather closing rapidly. Mountain weather could change with frightening speed, and being caught in the open during a severe thunderstorm posed serious risks to both the missing family and the rescue team. Marcus made the difficult decision to establish their own camp near the lake while they still had daylight and reasonable weather. The team set up their emergency shelter and prepared for what might be a long night of monitoring radio frequencies and planning their next day's search strategy. They would resume their efforts at first light, following the most likely routes the Patterson family might have taken from this location. As darkness settled over the mountains and the first drops of rain began to fall, each team member wrestled with unspoken fears about what they might discover in the days ahead. The Patterson family had simply vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the faintest evidence of their passage through this unforgiving wilderness. The storm struck with the fury that only high mountain weather could unleash. Rain hammered against the rescue team's emergency shelter throughout the night, driven by howling winds that seemed determined to tear their temporary refuge apart. Sarah lay in her sleeping bag, listening to the violence outside, wondering how the Patterson family was faring wherever they might be. If they were caught in the open during this tempest, their situation had just become exponentially more dangerous. Dawn brought little relief. The rain had stopped, but thick fog now blanketed the entire area, reducing visibility to mere yards in any direction. Marcus consulted his GPS and weather radio, learning that the front would likely persist for several more hours before clearing. Despite the challenging conditions, the team knew they had to continue their search. Every hour that passed decreased the likelihood of finding the missing family alive and well. Jake took point as they left their campsite, using his compass and GPS to navigate through the dense fog. The trail became treacherous in the wet conditions, with slippery rocks and muddy sections that threatened to send unwary hikers tumbling down steep slopes. They moved carefully, but deliberately, calling out the family's names every few minutes and listening intently for any response. The official trail led them steadily upward toward the mountain pass, gaining over 1,000 feet of elevation through a series of rocky switchbacks. As they climbed, the fog gradually began to thin, occasionally offering glimpses of the dramatic landscape surrounding them. Jagged peaks pierced the gray ceiling above, while deep valleys fell away into obscurity below. Emma discovered the next significant clue about 2 hours into their morning hike. A small-day pack lay partially hidden behind a boulder just off the main trail. Marcus carefully examined the pack while Emma photographed its position and contents. Inside, they found a child's extra clothes, some snacks, and a small journal with Mia Patterson written in careful 8-year-old handwriting on the cover. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. Why would the family abandon a child's pack in this location? The pack showed no signs of damage that might indicate an accident, and its contents remained dry and neatly organized. Jake examined the ground around the boulder, but found the rocky terrain too hard to reveal clear footprints or other tracking signs. Marcus attempted another series of radio calls, broadcasting on multiple emergency frequencies and using their satellite communicator to send distress signals. He also tried calling the Patterson family's emergency device directly, hoping they might respond if they were within range. The mountains remained silent except for the whisper of wind through the rocks and the distant sound of water cascading down granite walls. As the fog continued lifting, more of the landscape became visible around them. The trail ahead split into 2 distinct paths: the main route that continued toward the mountain pass, and a secondary trail that branched off toward a series of small lakes nestled in a cirque basin. According to their maps, the secondary trail was not part of the Patterson family's filed itinerary, but experienced hikers sometimes deviated from planned routes to explore interesting side destinations. The team faced a crucial decision. They could continue following the main trail toward the pass, or they could investigate the secondary route to the lakes. With limited daylight and challenging weather conditions, they couldn't afford to waste time on wrong choices. Marcus gathered his teammates for a quick consultation, weighing the available evidence and their collective experience in similar situations. Jake argued for checking the lakes, pointing out that families with children often gravitated toward water features where kids could play and explore. Emma supported continuing on the main trail, noting that experienced hikers like the Pattersons would be unlikely to deviate significantly from their planned route, especially with children in tow. Sarah found herself torn between the 2 options, unable to shake her growing sense that something catastrophic had happened to the missing family. After several minutes of discussion, Marcus made the call to split their efforts. Jake would investigate the secondary trail to the lakes while the other 3 team members continued toward the pass. They would maintain radio contact and reunite at a predetermined checkpoint later in the day. If either group discovered significant evidence of the Patterson family, they would immediately call for the others to join them. The division of their team violated standard search and rescue protocols, but Marcus felt the unusual circumstances justified the risk. They were running out of time and options, and covering more ground seemed worth the potential dangers of operating with reduced numbers. Jake disappeared into the fog along the secondary trail, while Sarah, Emma, and Marcus pressed on toward the pass. The main trail became increasingly challenging as they gained elevation, with loose rock and steep exposed sections that required careful attention to safety. They moved roped together across the most dangerous areas, knowing that a single slip could result in a serious fall. The fog finally began clearing as they approached the pass, revealing a landscape of stark beauty and intimidating scale. Massive granite walls rose thousands of feet on either side of the narrow saddle, while glaciers clung to the highest peaks like frozen waterfalls. The pass itself was a windswept notch in the mountain spine, offering spectacular views into the valley beyond. At the pass, they discovered evidence that made their hearts sink. David Patterson's distinctive red baseball cap lay wedged between two rocks, along with a broken hiking pole that matched the description in the missing persons report. More disturbing was the presence of what appeared to be dried blood on some nearby rocks. Though the amount was relatively small and could have resulted from a minor injury rather than a serious trauma. Marcus immediately radioed Jake to report their discovery and request his return to their location. While they waited for their teammate to rejoin them, the three searchers carefully documented the scene and expanded their search of the immediate area. The pass was exposed to severe weather and offered few places where a family could take shelter, making it an unlikely location for the Pattersons to remain for any extended period. Emma noticed something that chilled her to the bone as she examined the area more closely. Several rocks near where they found the hat showed scratch marks and gouges that looked suspiciously like claw marks from a large animal. The mountains were home to both black bears and mountain lions, either of which could pose a serious threat to a family group, especially if they encountered animals protecting cubs or territory. The possibility of a wildlife encounter added a terrifying new dimension to their search. If the Patterson family had been attacked by a large predator, the situation would require an entirely different approach. They would need to consider their own safety more carefully while also expanding their search to areas where injured people might have sought refuge or where predators might have dragged their victims. Jake's voice crackled over the radio as he reported his findings from the lake basin. He had discovered what appeared to be a hastily abandoned campsite near one of the smaller lakes, with camping gear scattered around as if the occupants had left quickly. A torn piece of fabric hanging from a tree branch matched the blue material they had found earlier, and fresh disturbances in the earth suggested recent activity. Marcus made the decision to reunite their team at Jake's location before proceeding further. The evidence they had gathered painted a picture of a family that had encountered some form of emergency, possibly involving dangerous wildlife. Their scattered belongings and the apparent haste of their departure from the lake campsite suggested they had fled from something threatening. As the three team members made their way down from the pass toward the lake basin, Sarah couldn't escape the growing conviction that they were no longer conducting a rescue mission. The pattern of evidence suggested something had gone terribly wrong for the Patterson family, and their chances of being found alive were diminishing with each passing hour. The silence of the mountains felt oppressive now, heavy with unspoken fears and the weight of responsibility. Somewhere in this vast wilderness, a family was missing, possibly injured or worse. The rescue team pressed on through the rugged terrain, driven by duty and hope, but haunted by the possibility that they might be too late to save the people they had come to find. The lake basin revealed a scene that confirmed the rescue team's worst fears. Jake had discovered not just scattered camping equipment, but clear evidence of a violent encounter. A sleeping bag lay shredded near the water's edge, its synthetic fillings scattered across the rocky shore like artificial snow. Deep gouges in the soft earth around the former campsite told a story of struggle and panic. Sarah knelt beside the largest set of claw marks, measuring them with her field ruler. The impressions were consistent with a mature black bear, possibly a large male defending territory or a female protecting cubs. Fresh scat found nearby contained berry remnants and what appeared to be fabric fibers, painting a disturbing picture of the encounter the Patterson family had experienced. Emma examined the scattered camping gear with the paramedics' eye for detail. A first aid kit lay open with supplies strewn about, suggesting someone had attempted to treat injuries during or immediately after the attack. Blood-stained bandages and antiseptic wipes indicated the wounds had been serious enough to require immediate medical attention. The team's radio equipment suddenly crackled to life with an automated emergency beacon signal. The weak transmission was intermittent and heavily distorted, but Marcus recognized the unique identifier code belonging to the Patterson family's satellite communicator. The device was broadcasting from somewhere relatively close, though the mountainous terrain made it impossible to determine an exact location. Jake immediately began triangulating the signal using their directional antenna while the others prepared for rapid movement. The emergency beacon indicated that at least one member of the Patterson family was alive and had managed to activate their distress device. However, the weak and sporadic nature of the signal suggested the device might be damaged or running low on battery power. Following the signal led them away from the lake basin toward a series of steep ravines and cliff faces that formed the cirque's far wall. The terrain became increasingly treacherous as they descended into a narrow gorge where a seasonal stream had carved deep channels through the granite. Progress slowed to a crawl as they navigated house-sized boulders and slippery rock faces. The emergency signal grew stronger as they worked their way deeper into the ravine system, but its intermittent nature continued to frustrate their attempts at precise navigation. Several times they thought they were closing in on the source, only to have the signal fade completely for long stretches. The rocky walls of the gorge created unpredictable radio reflections that made triangulation extremely difficult. Emma was the first to hear human voices echoing faintly from somewhere ahead. She called for silence and strained to listen, eventually picking out what sounded like a child crying and an adult voice attempting to provide comfort. The sound seemed to be coming from deeper in the ravine, possibly from some kind of cave or overhang where the family might have taken shelter. The team moved even more cautiously now, aware that hasty movement could trigger rockfall or other hazards in the unstable terrain. They called out repeatedly, identifying themselves as search and rescue personnel, but received no immediate response. The crying continued intermittently, growing slightly louder as they progressed through the rocky maze. Jake discovered the entrance to a large cave system hidden behind a screen of fallen boulders and dense vegetation. The opening was barely large enough for an adult to squeeze through, but it led into what appeared to be a substantial underground chamber. Fresh scuff marks on the rocks around the entrance indicated recent human passage. Marcus squeezed through the cave entrance first, using his headlamp to illuminate the space beyond. Inside the cave, he found David Patterson sitting against the far wall with his young daughter Mia cradled in his lap. Both were alive, but showed obvious signs of injury and exhaustion. David's left arm hung at an unnatural angle, clearly broken, while long claw marks across his back had been crudely bandaged with torn clothing. 8-year-old Mia appeared to be suffering from exposure and shock rather than serious physical injury, though she clung to her father with desperate intensity and would not respond to Marcus's gentle questions. Her small body shook uncontrollably, and her eyes held the distant look of someone who had experienced trauma far beyond her young years. The cave also contained the body of Lisa Patterson, David's wife, who had apparently succumbed to massive injuries inflicted during the bear attack. David had covered her body with their remaining sleeping bag in a futile attempt to provide dignity in death. His grief-stricken eyes told Marcus everything he needed to know about the family's ordeal without requiring detailed explanation. Emma immediately took charge of medical care for the survivors, while Sarah helped expand her working space in the cave. David had managed to activate their emergency beacon after reaching the cave, but the device's antenna had been damaged during the attack, resulting in the weak and intermittent signal that had led the rescue team to their location. The most pressing mystery remained the whereabouts of 12-year-old Tommy Patterson. David's account, delivered in fragmented whispers between waves of pain from his injuries, revealed that the boy had fled during the initial moments of the bear attack. In the chaos and terror of the encounter, Tommy had run deeper into the forest, and neither parent had been able to pursue him while dealing with the aggressive animal. David explained that the family had been preparing dinner at their lakeside camp when a large black bear had emerged from the surrounding forest. The animal appeared agitated and defensive, possibly protecting cubs in the area, and had not been deterred by their attempt to make noise and appear large as recommended in bear safety guidelines. The attack had been swift and devastating. Lisa had been closest to the bear when it charged and had taken the brunt of its aggression while David tried to shield the children. Tommy had run when his father shouted for the kids to flee, but little Mia had frozen in terror and been scooped up by David as he retreated toward the rocky terrain where the bear would be less likely to pursue. David had carried his injured wife and daughter to the cave system, hoping to find safety while Lisa's wounds could be treated. However, her injuries had been too severe, and she had died within hours despite his desperate efforts to save her. David and Mia had remained in the cave for 3 days, too injured and traumatized to attempt hiking out for help. Marcus immediately organized an expanded search for Tommy Patterson while Emma stabilized David and Mia for evacuation. The boy had now been missing for 3 days in wilderness conditions that included severe weather, dangerous wildlife, and terrain that challenged experienced adults. The chances of finding him alive were diminishing rapidly, but the team refused to abandon hope. Jake established communication with their base station and requested immediate helicopter evacuation for the survivors along with additional search personnel for the missing boy. Weather conditions in the high country remained marginal for aircraft operations, but the urgency of the situation demanded taking calculated risks. As they prepared David and Mia for the difficult journey out of the ravine to a helicopter landing zone, the silence of the mountains was suddenly shattered by a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding cliffs. The sound was unmistakably a rifle shot, fired from somewhere in the forest beyond the lake basin. The rescue team exchanged tense glances, uncertain whether the gunshot represented good news or bad. Local hunters occasionally used these remote areas during appropriate seasons, and it was possible that Tommy had encountered someone who could provide help. Alternatively, the shot might indicate that someone had been forced to defend themselves against the same dangerous wildlife that had attacked the Patterson family. Marcus made the difficult decision to split their efforts once again. Emma would continue caring for David and Mia while Jake guided them toward the helicopter landing zone. Marcus and Sarah would investigate the source of the gunshot, hoping to find either Tommy or someone who might have information about his whereabouts. The sound of the rifle shot had come from a densely forested area about a mile from their current location, requiring the two rescuers to navigate challenging terrain while time pressure mounted. They moved as quickly as safety allowed, calling Tommy's name repeatedly and listening for any response that might guide them to the missing boy. As they worked their way through the thick forest, Sarah spotted movement in a clearing ahead. A man in hunting clothes was kneeling beside a small figure lying motionless on the ground. Her heart raced as she recognized the size and clothing of the figure as matching Tommy Patterson's description. The hunter looked up as Marcus and Sarah emerged from the forest, his weathered face reflecting a mixture of relief and concern. Beside him, Tommy Patterson lay unconscious but breathing, his clothes torn and dirty from days of survival in the wilderness. The boy showed obvious signs of exposure, dehydration, and exhaustion, but appeared to have avoided serious injury during his ordeal. The hunter introduced himself as Robert Hayes, a local resident who had been tracking what he believed to be a dangerous bear in the area. He had discovered Tommy collapsed beside a small stream, apparently having survived for 3 days by drinking water and eating berries he found in the forest. The rifle shot had been fired to scare away the same black bear that had likely attacked the Patterson family, as the animal had been stalking the unconscious boy when Hayes arrived. Emma's medical expertise proved crucial as she treated Tommy for severe dehydration and hypothermia while they waited for helicopter evacuation. The boy regained consciousness briefly during transport, asking repeatedly for his mother and sister. Marcus made the difficult decision not to inform him of his mother's death until they reached medical facilities where proper psychological support would be available. The helicopter evacuation required 3 trips to transport all survivors and deceased family members from the remote location. David and Mia Patterson were flown to a trauma center for treatment of their injuries and psychological counseling to help them process their traumatic experience. Tommy was hospitalized for several days while doctors addressed his exposure-related medical issues. The bear responsible for the attack was eventually located and destroyed by wildlife officials after determining that its aggressive behavior posed an ongoing threat to human safety in the area. Investigation revealed that the animal had been protecting cubs, explaining its defensive behavior when the Patterson family unknowingly approached its territory. The rescue mission had ended with mixed results that would haunt the team members for years to come. They had successfully located and saved 3 members of the Patterson family, but Lisa Patterson's death served as a stark reminder of how quickly outdoor recreation could turn deadly in wilderness environments. The family's ordeal highlighted the importance of bear safety education and proper emergency preparedness for backcountry travelers. David Patterson later credited the rescue team's persistence and expertise with saving his children's lives. Without their systematic search and willingness to follow weak radio signals in a dangerous terrain, Tommy and Mia might not have survived their wilderness ordeal. The tragedy brought changes to local emergency response protocols and increased emphasis on wildlife safety education for visitors to the area. For Sarah, Emma, Marcus, and Jake, the mission represented both their greatest success and most heartbreaking failure. They had proven that determination and professional expertise could overcome seemingly impossible odds to save lives. But they would never forget that sometimes even their best efforts couldn't prevent tragedy in the unforgiving wilderness they had sworn to protect.